This video is made possible by Skillshare. The first 1,000 people to use a link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. This was one of those special moments in Formula 1 history. Moments that you cherish, that you look back upon, with a gleaming smile on your face, unless you're Carlos Sainz. Yet, if you rewound the clock back 12 months from this moment, you would never believe this to have happened. So, how did we get here? Well, that's why we're all here. So, let me take you through the Odyssey of Pierre Gasly.
Everybody gather round and listen to my song.
Today, Pierre Gasly is one of the more revered talents on the grid, putting in consistently good performances, and putting his AlphaTauri into places where it didn't deserve to be. But it wasn't always like this. Just 1 year prior to this, Gasly was dumped from the Red Bull racing team due to lack of performance over his teammate. This of course made no sense to anybody that was familiar with Pierre Gasly, because as he proved in the lower formula, he was always an exceptional driver. Gasly began racing in karts in 2007 and competed right through to 2010. He achieved good results in the European and World Karting Championships before progressing to cars in 2011, driving in the French F4 Championship. After a somewhat rocky start to his season, he eventually came through to finish third in the standings after dominating the last few rounds. He then graduated to Formula Renault for 2012, driving full-time in the Euro Cup Series, where he finished behind teammate Nick de Vries in the standings, although he did compete well throughout the year, taking podiums at Spa-Francorchamps and the Nürburgring. Not a particularly outstanding affair, although he would return to the series in 2013. And this time, Gasly would show the world what he was made of, taking 3 wins throughout the season and winning the title ahead of Oliver Rowland and Esteban Ocon. These performances were enough to draw the attention of former Grand Prix driver and career destroyer Helmut Marko. By the way, let me preface this by saying that Helmut Marko has a brilliant eye for talent. It's just a shame that he only has one of them. The only issue is that when you look through the history of the program, it is a little questionable in some instances whether he manages it exactly right. Nevertheless, Marko drafted Gasly into the Red Bull Junior team for the 2014 season, and obviously saw Gasly's cars decked out in Red Bull sponsorship to this day. And speaking of sponsorship, this video is sponsored by Skillshare. So, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes for creative and curious people. Explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. And I know that sounds like a typical spiel, but as a creative person, I've always found Skillshare intriguing. I've got some upcoming projects revolving around filmmaking, and this class by Zach Mulligan taught me a lot about the fundamentals about cinematography and everything that goes into it. Well, this class by Isaiah Street, where I learned a lot more about what goes into making a music video. But that's not where it ends. There are tons of classes on various different topics that I haven't even touched upon, but that I'm still very excited to explore, whether it be web development, animation, filmmaking, creative writing, marketing. Skillshare has a lot to offer for those looking to broaden their creative knowledge. Another great thing about this platform is its affordability, being less than $10 a month with annual subscription. And if you're looking to get a taster of this, the first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. So thank you once again to Skillshare for sponsoring the video. Now, let's get back to Pierre. Gasly would contest the World Series by Renault for 2014, driving alongside William Buller at Arden. Gasly would go winless throughout the season, but a slew of good consistent performances saw him take second in the standings, finishing just behind fellow Red Bull Junior Carlos Sainz. It was during the 2014 season where Gasly would get his first taste of GP2 machinery, replacing Tom Dillman at Caterham from Monza onwards. He was performing relatively decently, until he found out why Sergio Canamassas was Sergio Canamassas. Gasly would make GP2 his home for the 2015 season, driving with Dams and paired with fellow Red Bull Junior Alex Lynn. Gasly, once again, went winless throughout the season, although a handful of pole positions and strong performances towards season's end indicated that he was perhaps coming to grips with the machinery and that 2016 would be his year. And so we come to 2016. Gasly has moved to Prema alongside Italian Jesus, and in with a good shout of a title shot. Needless to say, Prema were the dominant force all year. Gasly sometimes made life difficult for himself, but this was balanced out by the fact that Giovinazzi embodied the ethos of the traditional Italian racing driver. Fast, but with a violent tendency to crash the car. So while Giovinazzi came on strong in the last half of the season, it wasn't enough to rein in Gasly, who took the title by just 8 points and now left the Frenchman with little avenue left other than Formula 1. But of course, he wouldn't be afforded this opportunity. At least, not yet. Gasly made a one-off appearance in Formula E, subbing for Sebastian Buemi in New York, finishing decently in both races. However, he would spend most of 2017 in Japan, contesting the Super Formula Series, which plays host to some brilliant talent, including the likes of Nick Cassidy, Felix Rosenqvist, Jan Mardenborough, Andre Lotterer, Naoki Yamamoto, Kamui Kobayashi, Kazuki Nakajima, and Narayan Karthikeyan. Now, this series is pretty tricky to be competitive in, at the best of times. For Gasly especially, given his teammate was Naoki Yamamoto, two-time Super Formula champion and Kyle Larson's Japanese clone. However, Gasly found himself in the right place at the right time, taking 2 wins at Motegi and Autopolis, and was second by just half a point heading into the final round at Suzuka. So, GP2 champion, and in prime contention for the Super Formula title, Gasly was higher than Randy Lanier's jet, and he would get another booster when he was drafted in to replace Daniel Kvyat for the remainder of the 2017 season, starting from the Malaysian Grand Prix. However, he would be forced to miss the United States Grand Prix so that he can attend the Super Formula finale at Suzuka. But the round would be cancelled after a typhoon swept through, so he eventually returned to finish the last 3 rounds of the F1 season. 2018 would see Gasly compete full-time in Formula 1 for Toro Rosso, driving alongside Le Mans winner and tauntrophobe Brendan Hartley. And while Hartley was no slouch behind the wheel, it was kind of expected for Gasly to perform a little bit better, although no one really expected some of the performances he would set in. Round 2 of the championship in Bahrain. Gasly qualifies on the 3rd row of the grid in what was a notable performance, although he would go one better in the race by finishing 4th and winning driver of the day. It was this performance that made everyone sit up and take notice. But in the next round, he committed the cardinal sin of crashing into his teammate, which didn't really make him look like $1,000,000. Having said that, Gasly scored 4 more points finishes throughout the season, and this was crucial for the Red Bull hierarchy because over at the main Red Bull team, Daniel Ricciardo had decided against being Max Verstappen's slave for the 2019 season and opted to join Renault on a 2-year deal. And after Pierre's exceptional performances throughout the year, he was subsequently announced as Red Bull's second driver. So Gasly seemed to be on top of the world at the time. After a successful junior career and an impressive first year in Formula 1, there was a fair amount of expectation put upon him heading into the 2019 season. Little did we know, however, that he was in for an absolute nightmare. Gasly only out-qualified Verstappen once in his time at Red Bull, and this was really down to Max being caught out by a red flag in Q2. He had a modest showing at the British Grand Prix, however, in his time at Red Bull, he was beaten around the park by Verstappen convincingly, with the average gap in qualifying being over 4/10 of a second, and in the races, he fell back faster than Teo Fabi's hairline. It seemed to be quite a rocky start for him, but then came the Austrian Grand Prix, where things got much worse. While Verstappen went on to win the Grand Prix after an epic drive, Gasly finished in 7th place, 1 lap behind his teammate. Now, that doesn't look particularly great on paper, and this would happen again in Hungary. By now, the criticism was seeping in, and speculation as to whether or not he would keep his seat was starting to mount. Christian Horner insisted that Gasly would be retained for the remainder of the season, but you do have to take what Red Bull says with a grain of salt, and that's putting it diplomatically. Sure enough, ahead of the Belgian Grand Prix, it was announced that Gasly would be sent down to Toro Rosso to basically get his head straight, while his seat would be taken up by newcomer Alexander Albon. This was a gut punch to Gasly, especially given his previous season. Now partnering Daniel Kvyat, Gasly put on some performances which were on par with what he produced in Toro Rosso the previous year, with nothing truly outstanding, but nothing either to suggest that he lost his mojo behind the wheel. But then came the Brazilian Grand Prix, where Gasly found himself in P4 with a handful of laps to go. However, up ahead, Albon and Hamilton attempted the #Blessed Tango, which saw Albon spin out of a podium. This let Gasly scythe through to take 2nd place ahead of Hamilton, and in an amazing scene that you love to see but never really does happen in motorsport, Gasly out-drags Hamilton in a sprint to the line to take his first career podium, after the wretched year that he had. This was an amazing sight that pretty much everyone was happy to witness, although this wasn't enough to convince Red Bull's hierarchy to take him back for the 2020 season, and so remained with the now renamed AlphaTauri team for the forthcoming season. While the new car certainly looked good in pre-season testing, the midfield turned out to be ultra competitive. McLaren had their MCL35, Renault had their RS20, and Racing Point had their W10. But the team began to produce some good results over the course of the season. There was something else too. Gasly was noticeably close to Albon in the results. And with Albon struggling like a eunuch in an orgy at Red Bull, many were wondering whether or not Gasly should be looked at again for that 2nd Red Bull seat. Then Then of course came the Italian Grand Prix. Most see a Formula 1 race at Monza as being one of those uneventful affairs that is only really there because of the history of the track, and so that large masses of Italians can congregate and watch Ferrari try and make sense of themselves. Bruh. Qualifying didn't suggest anything would be any different either. The Mercedes were about as dominant as they had been all season long. But the race would be a whole different kettle of fish. The race was proceeding as you'd normally expect, until lap 17, when Kevin Magnussen's Haas lost the will to live. This brought out the yellow flag, and saw several drivers bolstered up the order as a result. One of those drivers was Gasly, and once the race got back underway, Leclerc crashed heavily at the Parabolica. It kicked up a load of dust, a marshal wiped his eyes with a red flag, and the race was stopped. During this time, drivers like Sir Lancelot managed to make a free pit stop without losing track position. The result was a completely different running order than when we started, and to add to all of this, Hamilton was issued a stop-go penalty for pit lane infringements, meaning that whoever was second on the restart was the effective leader of the race. After Stroll bowled a wide at the first lap of the restart, Gasly found himself as the effective leader of the race. But with the pace that Sainz was showing all weekend, it was kind of expected that Sainz would scythe through to take his first win, and he was on him for the remainder of that race. But in the end, Gasly held on. This was a significant moment in Grand Prix history, not just because David had beaten Goliath, but also because of the story behind the man who won the race. It's the story of a driver who had gone through the lowest of lows to the highest of highs. A driver who was once a reject, now on top of the podium. A driver who had just joined an exclusive list of names. Trintignant, Beltois, Sever, Depailler, Lafitte, Jabouille, Arnoux, Pironi, Tombe, Prost, Alesi, Panis, and now Gasly. All French drivers who had won a Grand Prix. And with Gasly continuing to perform the way he is, it's fair to assume that it might not be his last. It's character building, and it's great for the sport, even if just 12 months prior, you'd have never have guessed it. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe. Check out that Skillshare thing that I mentioned earlier on. Drop a comment below. And always remember, keep it respectful, be wholesome, don't be a manus. And as always, I'll see you all later.
Let me tell you, wanna see you fly, way up in my sights. To the day I die, we're heading for the silver line. Let me tell you, wanna see you